Hey tea heads, this is Don from Mayleaf. It's time to get geeky with an in-depth review of this kettle here. This is the 1 litre Artisan Gooseneck kettle from Brewista. I've been told for a couple of years that I need to check out this kettle. I purchased it, so it's not been gifted. I purchased it about, I want to say about 4 or 5 months ago. So it's been heavily road tested. And if you don't know, then we sample teas every single day. You know, I'm tasting teas. The kettle is always warm at our home. It's always on. So this has gone through probably the equivalent of most people's, I don't know, 3-4 years worth of use in the last 4 to 5 months. So it's been heavily tested. So I can give you an in-depth review of all the things I love, all the things I dislike, and the improvements that we can make. And I'm pitting it up against this one here. This is the fellow Stagg EKG. I've done a complete review of this kettle. I'll stick a link in the description below. And I'm also going to be referencing the Bonavita gooseneck kettle, because I know that those are the sort of 3 main gooseneck kettles out there: the Bonavita, the Stagg, and the Brewista. And it's also worth saying that there are so many now. If you go online, you can find so many sort of lookalike gooseneck kettles, and I'm sure that they all have their pros and cons, but these are the main brands. So we're going to be talking about them in comparison. So I used to have the Bonavita. That lasted about, I don't know, 2-3 years and then broke. As I said, we go through kettles very quickly, because we're sort of, if any kettle manufacturers want to road test kettles, we are like, you know, your road testers, because we go through them very quickly because we're continuously using them. And then this one I reviewed, I think in like May 2020. After only a few weeks of use, and this one has started last year, so it lasted about 2 and a bit years, and it started to sort of freak out, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And as I said, this one's been in here for about 4 to 5 months of continuous use. So I'm going to use the same categories that I used for the previous one, so we can sort of compare. In the previous review I did of this Stagg EKG, I said that this one came out on top of the Bonavita just about, but there were some sort of pros and cons. I have to say that my opinion of this kettle has gone down over use, and I will say that the reason why this one we've replaced it is because the electronics down here started to freak out. Now, when I was doing the review 2 years ago, it was already a bit glitchy. Sometimes there'd be a few glitches on the display, and so, you know, but it persisted. It lasted a while, but I'm not convinced that this is really waterproof down here. And I think that, you know, it's susceptible to, through heavy use, it's susceptible to damage. And it started freaking out in the sort of middle of last year, and it was just really annoying me. So I had to get a new one. I should also say that we're going to be doing this review squarely for Gong Fu tea brewers. Of course, what I'm going to be saying today also applies for those of you who are purchasing this for coffee, but these kettles are pretty much designed for pour over coffee and for baristas. And so, you know, I'm well aware that some of the points that I'm going to be making may not represent like bad design, because it might be that that works well for coffee brewers, but I'm obviously focusing my attention on my passion, which is Gong Fu tea. So let's start with price, because I think it's good to get that out of the way so we understand the differences. So Bonavita is absolutely the of the 3 kettles. It comes in at around $120 there or thereabouts. You can shop around for prices. Next up is the Brewista. This comes in at around, on average, around $170, and this Stagg EKG is the most expensive at $180. So not that much difference between these, but if we're going to be ranking, so what I'm going to try to do, and yes, it's crude, but I'm going to sort of rank 1, 2, and 3 for these kettles, and then we'll see how it sort of all tallies out at the end. So price point, obviously Bonavita wins, then Brewista, and then the Stagg EKG. But it's worth noting that these are relatively similar, you know, $10, $15 there or thereabouts. Right, let's now talk about build quality. And both of these kettles and the Bonavita are all excellent build quality. The Bonavita has a little bit of plastic inside the kettle, but it doesn't touch the water, so it's not a big deal. Both the Stagg EKG and the Brewista are all stainless steel inside. So, you know, if you're a bit concerned about plastic, then, you know, these are probably better. This is plastic up here, and this is not real wood. That is a sort of, I guess it's some sort of composite to make it look like wood. But, you know, the overall, all of these kettles are very good build quality. I initially had said that I preferred the Stagg EKG build quality to the Bonavita. That's sort of shifted a little bit because of how quickly that broke in terms of the electronic display and the electronics. And it still works, but it's sort of hit and miss. It's an intermittent fault, the worst kinds of faults, because you just like, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? The other thing is the lid. The lid of the Stagg EKG starts to get a bit loose, and it tends to splutter water. Especially when it's boiling and you've got it relatively full, it tends to splutter water, and that can be sort of, you know, it's not fun to have little splashes of boiling water land on you. And it also means that more water falls onto the base, and I think that might contribute to the fact that the electronics started to go down. The Brewista, however, beautiful build quality, really lovely, very, very solid in the hands, and you know, it's simple. It's got a really good solid feel to it. The base is got glass on it, so it's waterproof. And well, we'll see over time, but for 4 or 5 months, not a problem. Water has obviously spilt on it, but there's not been any issue. So in terms of build quality, I am saying that I think Brewista is my number one, and sort of tied with Bonavita, and actually the Stagg EKG is in second place because it broke pretty quickly, and that lid has burnt me multiple times. Also, this little metal band here gets very, very hot, and that was not fun. So occasionally you do get a little burn here. Also, in the last review, I said that the cord on the Brewista and on the Stagg EKG was too short. Now, I know that these kettles are designed to be sort of plumbed in at your coffee station, and you know, that's fine. But for Gong Fu brewing, you want to be able to bring the kettle where you are brewing, because you're brewing at a table, maybe at a coffee table. And so I hate having to bring lots of extensions around. Now, at first glance, the Brewista is exactly the same. It's about that long. I'm not going to pull it out because it's going to be a big mess, but the big difference is that this is a detachable cable, right? Detachable with the classic kettle lead cable. And so you can basically get any length cable you want. That is a really big plus for me. So, you know, in terms of features, I would say that is a real big thing for Gong Fu brewers. You can essentially, you know, just get a longer cable and brew wherever you are. So that's really, really good. Also, the noise on both of these kettles, both of them are really good. They have a not too loud, a nice sort of luxurious rumble. I would say that the EKG is the quietest of all the kettles, but the noise is not going to bother you, or it shouldn't bother you. I think it's a really, really perfectly acceptable volume, and also the quality. There's nothing, because of the build quality, there's nothing sort of rattly or sort of clangy about the noise. It's just sort of a nice, luxurious sort of airline hum as it brings to temperature. So build quality, I'm giving top marks to Brewista and Bonavita, and second place is the Stagg EKG. Right, let's move on to the stylings, and I think that the undisputed winner of the most stylish, most Instagrammable kettle is the EKG. Styling is a personal choice. Of course, you might prefer this more rounded design. I think that this very utilitarian sort of flask shape here, and just the balance of everything really, really works well. And the silhouette is beautiful. The base is very, very small profile, so it just feels very minimal and classy. I think the Brewista is a pretty kettle. It's very similar to the Bonavita in terms of shape, very, very similar profile. The differences are that, first of all, the handle is not got this weird little plasticky separator that you use for your grip. I don't like that on the Bonavita. This one, the handle's really, really nice. It has a slightly different shape. Also, the base, it's similar, but the glass on here makes a big difference, and also the look of the LEDs, much more modern, much more sleek. I'm not going to turn it on because I want to test the timing of the speed of brewing, but speed of heating up. But overall, I think that this is a prettier kettle. The Bonavita had like quite a garish red, old school display, and the buttons were buttons that you pushed in, and they gave you like a plastic overlay so that it would stop it from getting damaged from water. So overall, the stylings, I think, of the Brewista are better than the Bonavita. But Stagg EKG, just in terms of looks, I think Stagg EKG wins. So number 1, number 2 for the Brewista, and number 3 for the Bonavita. One important note is, one thing that really started to bug me more and more and more about the EKG was the impossibility of seeing the temperature unless you were literally staring bird's eye view down on it. And that's really annoying. If you're brewing your tea and you don't want to have to like get up to just check the temperature, the viewing angle on this is really, really terrible. I can say that now after using it for years. It was so annoying, and because of the fact that it never gave you any visual display of if it had hit temperature, or auditory display or auditory signal, you had to get up every time to check the temperature. That really annoyed me. This very bright display, you can see it's really gives you all the information very clearly. I really like it. So styling is really good. It's worth me talking about the buttons, but I'll talk about them after we've done the speed test, because I don't want to like get this water to be hotter, because I need to do a fair test on how fast it heats up water. Capacity, an important one for me. This EKG, bottom of the list, because it's 0.9 liters. Now that might be perfectly fine for pour over coffee. I'm sure it is. But when you're brewing Gong Fu, you really want to fill up the kettle once and have like a good session without having to go and fill up again. And bear in mind, I drink so much tea that I'm always filling up the kettle, but I'm just trying to think about one session. This is 1 liter, same as the Bonavita, 1 liter. However, this has quite a lot of headroom on the 1 liter, and you can go up to about 1.2 liters perfectly fine, and that's unofficial. And Brewista have not given the go-ahead that you should overfill, but I do. 1.2 liters, have no problem with that. And that means that if you're brewing sort of in a pot like this, you're going to get at least 7-8 infusions out of one fill, at least. And that's good. So you could even get up to probably 10 infusions out of one fill of the kettle. The 0.9 is just a bit too small for me. So in terms of capacity, the Brewista is number 1, the Bonavita is number 2, and the Stagg EKG is number 3. Right, let's talk about speed. Now we're going to heat up this water. There's 1 liter of water in here, and it's at room temperature. It's been sitting here for, I don't know, about 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes. So it came from my urn, so it was already at room temperature, but it's at room temperature. So I'm going to pull up my stopwatch, and we're going to start this up. So turn this on. Click the fast boil function, and we'll talk about these buttons. So these are the buttons you've got. Very similar to the Bonavita. Actually, there's more buttons on this than the Bonavita. So that was one thing when I got it. I was like, oh, it's a bit too many buttons shining at me, but it's fine. They work well. Let's talk about them. That's obviously on off. This one here is for Fahrenheit and Celsius switching. On the Stagg EKG, these are little sort of quite loose switches on the back. Again, build quality was less impressive after I used it for a while. Then you've got this one here, which is timer, and this one here, which is to scroll through the preset temperatures. These are obviously to change the temperature, and this one is your keep warm function to basically bring it to temperature and hold it at temperature. So let's talk about the differences, like how you use these buttons. Obviously, Fahrenheit, Celsius is obvious. The timer I'll speak about later. The preset here, it basically scrolls through some factory presets, and I think they like sort of 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 85, 90, 96, I think. Unfortunately, you can't adapt those, you can't change those. They are fixed and you can never change them. So, you know, but they come close enough. Then you've got manual set temperature, so you can set temperatures manually. And then here, once you've set temperatures manually, once you put the kettle on, if the temperature of the water is below the temperature that you've set manually or the preset temperature, it'll start to heat it up. If you click this, it'll keep it warm. When you pour your water and you put it back onto the base, you have to click it again, otherwise it's not going to stay warm. That was a function that the EKG has as a different function, which is that it has it so that as soon as you put it back on, as long as there was you flick the hold switch on the back of the EKG base, then every time you put the kettle on, it would bring it back to temperature and hold it. And when I first did the review of the EKG, I said, oh, that's quite a nice function. It means that I don't have any buttons to push. It's always, you know, easy and, you know, quick to heat up. But I really did not use that function. Very soon afterwards, I realized that I was always putting the kettle on, going away, coming back an hour later and finding that the kettle was still spluttering and I was just literally rinsing through electricity. So my advice, if you got the EKG, turn that off. It was sort of a nice little thing that I thought, oh, that's quite useful because it means less button pushing, but I tended to forget to switch that off and switch off the kettle, and that was a problem. So I like this, it's fine. I've got to remember to switch it back on, heat it up. It helps me to conserve energy, and with energy prices these days, that is always a good thing. And finally, this button here, which is flashing, that's your fast boil function, which is really great. It's like, look, I just want to bring it to boiling point. Don't mess around with variable temperatures. Don't mess around with like trying to find like the perfect temperature. Just get me really hot water quickly. And it's meant to be a fast boil. I hope you realize that's not pretty fast, right? So let's talk about the speed. The Fellow definitely is the fastest. It would bring 0.9 liters, so not 1 liter, but 0.9 liters from room temperature to boiling point in around 3 minutes and 50 seconds. The Brewista is over 6 minutes. I can't quite recall the exact. Oh, if I turn this one on as well? No. See, I wouldn't know because I have to do this and look. I wouldn't be able to see it from here. So 3 minutes 50. Bonavita around, I think it's over 6 minutes. So this is the first of this kettle. It is relatively slow. We're at 4 minutes 25 seconds and it's at 71 degrees Celsius, which is 160 Fahrenheit. So it's a bit slow. We're going to see if it beats the Bonavita, but you know, I did find that I was missing the speed of the EKG. Now, again, it depends on how you're using the kettle. If you're having one session a day, it's not a big deal, right? But if you're brewing as much as I'm brewing, then that is time that you're not wasting, but you know, it's time that you're waiting. So the speed is obviously going to be important. We're only at 80 degrees, so you can see how slow it moves up. We'll talk about the temperature control next, once we've got the speed stopwatch time sorted. We're at 5 minutes and 30 seconds and we're at 85 degrees, and it's moving very slowly. The kettle is a 1.2 kilowatts from my knowledge, which is the same as the Stagg EKG. So why is it so much slower to bring to temperature? Well, of course, there's lots of, you know, variable factors in there, but I have a suspicion about something with this kettle, and I'm going to share that with you shortly, because this is another gripe that I have with this kettle. We're at 93, come on, 94, and it's 6 minutes and 14 seconds, 6 minutes, 15 seconds. We're hitting boiling point now, and that's sort of 6 minutes and, I don't know, 40 seconds, something like that. So it's slow. It's slow. 6 minutes, 40 seconds. So you can see here the steam rises out of these 3 holes. So make sure when you are using this kettle, don't turn the holes over where your hands are. Otherwise you will feel the heat. So this is fine. The Stagg EKG, it has a similar thing, but for some reason it just splutters like crazy when you're at like 1 liter. This one doesn't. Right, let's talk about temperature. The temperature control that you've got here is very, very good. It's better than the Bonavita because the Bonavita goes to 60 degrees as the lowest temperature, whereas here you can set it to be 40. 40 degrees Celsius, which is 104 Fahrenheit. That is great because, you know, there are some teas that you want very cold or very cool water. And so I love that. That was the same with the fellow EKG. So in terms of temperature lower limit, it's very, very good. Bonavita is running behind, I'm afraid. The temperature that you see here is always the live temperature. Obviously, when you're setting it, like, you know, if I'm pushing this button here and I'm setting it, then I'm seeing my target temperature and that's flashing. But basically, you know, as soon as it goes solid, that means that's the temperature inside the kettle. So you're always seeing a live temperature. That's really, really good. I like that about all of these kettles. You know, you always know what the temperature is, although, as I said, with the EKG, you have to get up and strain your neck to find out what it is. The EKG slightly has one function which is kind of cool, which is that it shows the target temperature and the temperature in the kettle at the same time, which is kind of nice because you can like always remember what you want to bring it up to. But in most cases, you're going to know what temperature you've set. And if not, you can always just sort of double check. So it's not really a big deal. One thing about the EKG is that whenever you put the kettle on, if the water temperature in the kettle is lower than what it remembers the target temperature to be, then it will always heat up. And so you can never really see a live temperature statically. It's always going to be heating when you see the live temperature. Again, not a big deal, but it's worth noting that as well. So the live temperature on here is good. The lower temperature gauge is good. Accuracy on this, I've noticed a few glitches here. The Bonavita is very, very accurate. Takes a little bit more time to get to the temperature, so when it's approaching the target temperature, it really slows down and sort of ticks slowly. This is similar. It's accurate. The EKG tend to overshoot maybe by a couple of degrees. Nothing big, but a couple of degrees. However, I did notice one thing here, which is that if you, let's set this to say 90 degrees, you've poured your first infusion, you're drinking, you're enjoying your tea, and then it goes down to sort of 80 degrees, let's say. Because there's a relatively small gap between 90 and 80, if you click the keep warm function to sort of bring it back to temperature and hold it there, it tends to overshoot, or it has overshot on several occasions by quite a big margin. Now, this doesn't happen if the water is cool or it's like 60, 50, you know, it just sort of powers through and then reaches that temperature. I suspect that what happens is because the temperature gap that it needs to make up is not that big, it sort of switches on, goes full blast, and then goes, oh, switch off, switch off, switch off, and it overshoots. And it can overshoot by 6, 7 degrees, sometimes even more. I've noticed that with this kettle. So while the reaching of target temperature from cool or from room temperature water is accurate, you have to watch out a little bit when you are just sort of bumping up the temperature to bring it back to your target temperature. It doesn't happen all the time. It was sort of on off. I couldn't sort of repeat it, but it definitely happened. I've spotted it quite a few times. So it's something to pay attention to. So in terms of accuracy, difficult. I'd probably give Bonavita number 1, and I'd probably share these out because this does overshoot a little bit sometimes. So I would probably share that out as joint second place, but they're all fine. They're going to suit your purpose. Just watch out for the possible overshooting when you're trying to bump up the temperature. And you will be trying to bump up the temperature, because one of my biggest faults with this Brewista kettle is that it loses heat very quickly. You can see it's already down to 96, so it's lost 4 degrees here. And I wasn't measuring it, but I've been using all these kettles for so long that it was just a very noticeable thing that this loses heat quickly, this kettle. Now, that's not a good thing, because it means it's not energy efficient, right? You're having to continuously, add more electricity in order to bring it to your target temperature. And it doesn't suit Gong Fu brewing, because Gong Fu brewing is like you brew, you sit, you drink for, 5-10 minutes, and then you want to brew again. You don't want to have to use too much electricity to bring it back to temperature. And because of that overshoot factor, on-off, occasional overshoot factor, you've always got to keep your eye on it a little bit. But yeah, it definitely, look at that. Had it dropped down to 90, it lost 5 degrees. Now, I've done another review with the Vectra kettle, which is a thermally insulated kettle, and that I love the thermal insulation of that kettle. It's like you just boil it once, you leave it alone, and like an hour later, you're still able to brew with that water. It's so good. Unfortunately, it's got lots of other problems, but if you want to check out that review, I'll stick a link in the description below. This one loses temperature very quickly, and I think that the main reason why is because this is a lighter kettle. And when I pick this one up and I pick up the Stagg EKG, I've actually measured it. This is 100 empty. This is 100 grams more heavy than the Brewista. I think that the walls of this stainless steel, the thickness of the stainless steel, is a bit too thin. And I think that that might be why it takes longer to heat up, or one of the contributing factors as to why it takes so long to heat up, because it's losing temperature here very, very quickly. And I would say that that is probably my biggest gripe with this kettle, is I do not like the poor energy efficiency of it and the fact that I'm always having to bump up the temperature. So in terms of accuracy, it's second place. In terms of the range, it's fine. It's sort of first place. But I have to say, in terms of like the usability of this kettle, it falls in second place against the Bonavita. Right, let's talk about the timer function. The timer function allows you to obviously time the brews. And the way that it works is you take this off, you see that that turns to a stopwatch. You then pour your tea. See, look, how do I do this? I pour the tea, do I time? I don't know. So I do this. And then I hit the timer and it starts, right? Great, lovely. It's the same as the Bonavita. The problem is that I've got to hold my kettle, I've got to put it down. If I put it down here, it cancels the timer. The EKG does not do that. The EKG continues counting, and I loved that feature about this kettle. Now, I don't always time my brews. In fact, I hardly ever do, but when I wanted to, let's say I was doing like a horizontal tasting, I want to make sure every tea was brewed exactly at the same exactly at the same timing. The EKG allowed me to do that. The other factor in the EKG is that the EKG has like a count down before it starts counting up. In other words, when you held the button down, it would say 3, 2, 1, and then it would start counting up. And when I first did the review, I said that's a bit annoying because I've poured the water and then I want to start the timer and it's going to have to wait 3 seconds before it starts actually counting. But I learned very, very quickly, thanks to some comments out there, that that's not the case. When you held the, it's working. When you held this, it's counting 3, 2, 1. You can start to pour at the point that it hits 0. So you don't have to keep holding it down. I got that wrong in the review. In other words, this has the best timer function. You hold it down for a few seconds, you start to see that counter going 3, 2, 1. You can pour it exactly the point it hits 0, and you can put the kettle back and it will keep timing your brew. This was a rinse, but I'm going to drink it anyway. I'm drinking Stone Milk, if you're interested. Stone Milk Yencha. So timer function, they all have it, but Stagg EKG wins, and Bonavita and the Brewista are identical. Exactly the same function, so they both sort of share second place. All right, moving on to the final area, we're talking about pour and ergonomics. So the takeaway is the pour on this is beautiful. I can't compare it directly with the Bonavita because I have thrown away that kettle a long time ago. So I can't say which is definitively better, but from my memory, I think this is the best. The speed at which you can control your pour can go from very, very slow to very, very fast. You can see it really motors. And so if you want to agitate those leaves, you want to put some energy into those leaves, you can. If you want to be very, very controlled in terms of your pour, you can. If you watch that Stagg EKG video, then you will know that my biggest gripe with this kettle, apart from the not so great build quality and those things that we're talking about with the lid, my biggest gripe, and the thing that really bugged me for years, and it never stopped bugging me, is that the speed of this pour is one speed. It's slow, it's controlled, great, but you have no ability to speed it up. It just is slow. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I was shaking my head or cursing the kettle when I was trying to fill up a larger pot. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like my arm is hurting. I have to sit and watch this tiny dribble coming out. Great if you're doing pour over coffee, I'm sure, very controlled, but you get the same control here. You've got really slow control. So if I wanted to hit a place, I could, but if I wanted to really get that water in and move things around, or if I just was a bit impatient, the pour on this kettle is absolute winner. Winner, chicken dinner, amazing pour on this. And the ergonomics in general of this kettle, I think, is some of my favorite. I mean, yes, the EKG is great. It's got this little thumb, spot here, and you've got accurate control. It feels maybe a little bit more like, yes, you could nail the accuracy maybe of a pour over coffee, but the feel on this, I actually think I prefer the balance of the feel on this, and I definitely prefer it to the Bonavita, because the Bonavita has that strange plastic handle that sort of squidges your fingers together. Make sure I don't have any of these on. So yeah, I love the ergonomics of this one. I love the pour on this one. I think the feel, the balance of it, I think it's great kettle. And so in terms of pour, I'm going to give the win to the Brewista, second place Bonavita, third place to the Stagg EKG. And just in general, in terms of ergonomics, I'm going to make this a tie because of all the sort of there's pros and cons on them, but I'm going to make this a tie and the Bonavita a second place. One last thing I should mention is that I have silenced all the noises on this kettle. The great thing about the Brewista is they allow you to make it silent or auditory. So you can have beeps to tell you when you're switching it on, when it's reaching temperature, and when the hold function or the warm function, which I think is an hour, when that stops. So you get beeps. I don't like beeps. So I've silenced it, and it's really great that Brewista has allowed me to do that. So it allows that flexibility. You can have it if you're maybe in a busy area and you're working in a busy environment and you want to hear the beep, then you can set it. It comes as default with sounds, but you can silence them, which is great. Okay, so If we look at the sort of final list, and I do realize it's crude, but if you look at the final list and you sort of tally up all the sort of first, seconds, and thirds, so the winner is going to be the lowest amount of points here, then I can say pretty confidently that the Brewista is my number one out of the three. And actually, the Bonavita has sort of overtaken the Stagg EKG. I said in the last video that the EKG just pipped the Bonavita to the post for me because I love the styling so much. I do think the Bonavita needs to up its game in terms of its styling. But the spluttering lid, the glitchy electronics, and the like epically slow pour and lack of flexibility in the pour speed has pushed the EKG into third place. So for me, the Brewista, out of the three that I've tried, is my favorite. I'm certainly happy that this is the currently working model, and I'm happy that I've got this one in my home. If over time I notice any other things popping up that I don't like, or I feel like I need to update the review, then I'll try to remember to update the comments. So if you're watching a long time after this has been released, then go check out the description, I should say, and you can see if there's any updates. But I have been testing this for, this is an overbrewed tea. I have been testing this for many months, every single day, continuously, and it has not let me down since. The biggest cons on it is the speed at which it reaches temperature. So, that might not bother you, but it bothers me. The speed at which it loses temperature. Those are really the two main areas that I think, you should know about. Other than that, and the slight overshooting sometimes of temperature, I think that this is a great, 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 great kettle. You might prefer the look of the Stagg EKG, but bear in mind all of those little faults that I talked about before. They're all good kettles, of course. They're all going to do the job. But, these differences are worth bearing in mind. And in my view, and Celine's view, this is our number one. That's it, tea heads. Check out our other videos, taste our teas wherever you are in the world by browsing mayleaf.com, and come visit us if you're ever in London. Other than that, I'm Don from Mayleaf. Thank you for being a part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags, keep drinking the sublime stuff, and spread the word, because nobody deserves bad tea. Bye.